separated your deep ball from everybody else?
My deep ball, it has a little secret sauce to it, man.
Never get too high, never get too low, but just keep moving.
The whole story is Carlos never beat me in any kind of sports in high school.
Welcome to New Stripe City, YouTube channel for diehard Bengals fans. But this is the Orange is the New Black podcast. I'm your host, Ace Boogie, joined by my co-host, Zim Hude. Zim, say what's up.
Hello, world. I'm really excited tonight to get into part 2 of our PFF co-op collab series that we're doing tonight. We've been blessed with the presence of Eric Eager, PFF Eric. Hold on, actually, am I saying that right? Actually, you tell everybody where they can find you at on Twitter and you know what you got going on currently before we even start off anything.
Yep, I'm Eric Eager. I run the research and development wing of Pro Football Focus, I'm at PFF_Eric.
And what I was gonna say, what don't you have your own site too though? But your site is just using, you know, like a link tree with just different other things. Because I was reading up a lot of different stuff. Even Ace was looking at some stuff on because he's in the coding world with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have I have a data camp course on data camp. Like I have my own websites. The link is in my bio. Usually, like if I'll get inquiries and stuff, somebody will go through that. Prior to being at PFF, I was a math professor, so like I had my own website and stuff. So I just kept that going while at PFF. But most of my work, like I don't have an individual blog or anything. Most of my work is on PFF.com, and obviously very thrilled to start. I guess this is like my 6th year with them, which is kind of great. We've been, you know, at the beginning it was probably something like 50 full-time employees, and now we're probably in that more like triple of that. So growing and obviously representing for Cincinnati in the OTR.
I know some guys over there. One thing that I wanted to ask you that before we get into any of the football stuff is there a crop top website or something that you're doing? Because I don't know if you guys have seen the imagery or the artwork for tonight's show, Eric is the leader of the crop top gang, or so it appears.
I am. Yeah, there's a couple funny stories. Back when I was earlier on in PFF, my boss was angry with me about something that wasn't my fault. To try to make amends with me, he bought me and my one of my best friends and my podcast co-host George Shahuri Whitesnake tickets because one time I said I liked the Whitesnake song. We went to a concert in Dayton, which is like the first time I've ever been to Dayton. But then at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis that year, as I wanted to do, I impromptu started roasting my friend George in front of everybody. And George bet me because I made fun of the fact that he only eats the only thing that George will ever eat in Cincinnati is Jeff Ruby's. Like he will not go beneath Jeff Ruby's. And so my boss bet George the fact that he thought I could push press 225 pounds because he saw me he saw me do it before. And if I could do it once, then George would have to eat like Donato pizza that he hated or something like that for a whole week. And if I couldn't do it, then I had to wear the crop top on the podcast. And I think it was a military press. He's seen me push press before, which is obviously easier because you can use your legs. Military press, you just have to use your arms. And I think I got to like 215, but I couldn't get 225. So as any good person does, you pay up your bet, which for me was to expose my midsection on my podcast.
No, that's facts. That's facts. So kicking things off, I think, Zim, you had a pretty spirited debate earlier today on Twitter. So is there something about the wide receiver position that you want to ask him about?
Well, I do defer to, the smart people because I'm not amongst the smarter elites of the world. But that's why I defer to the analytics and some of that stuff. But a lot of that stuff to me is like, make a long story short, a lot of different times because black and orange Bengals get a bad rap on everything. I think it's very, very common that it's very easy for people to pile up on position groups that don't do really well. But there comes a time in a place, and if you study the history of the Bengals, they're always really, really good at the wide receiver position. I've been on record to calling them wide receiver university. But because that doesn't mean wins, I think a lot of people called me a homer by saying that I felt as though the Bengals were the second best core, just wide receivers in the National Football League. And the reason why is because every single tandem or every single trio or quad that I could find in the National Football League, a lot of them are either coming off of an injury or aging. It is a very rare scenario where you have companies like PFF charting 3 guys on slate on target to get 1,000 yards, and then combine that with the actual fantasy football world that most people play, where they're drafting all of these guys around 2, 3, 4. Maybe some get down to the 5th. It's very few teams in the National Football League that can say that. Eric Eager would have you. What do you say to that or that argument? I guess.
And a former Bengals wide receiver writes my check, so I'm certainly willing to sort of side with you guys. I know on your intro you had Jeff Blake, and Jeff Blake threw a lot of deep balls to Darnay Scott and Carl Pickens back in the day, and those were two great receivers. Obviously TJ and even Terrell Owens played for So I think you guys have a point. It was really interesting preparing for this. I looked at receiver pairs. And I look at somebody like Boyd and Higgins. I've been on the record, like I'm a Boyd lover. I think Boyd is one of the best slot receivers in all of football. And I would put Boyd and Higgins themselves in the top 10 of receiver pairs. And so then if you extrapolate from that, so like who would be ahead of them in pairs? Hill and Kelsey. When you add Hardman to that, I don't think that's better than, necessarily than like I think Boyd, Higgins, and Chase are better on the average player's better. So
but
like
Kelsey's a tight end. Kelsey's a tight end.
And Kelsey's a tight end, although he barely ever plays there. But you can sort of like look, the fact that we're talking about the 3-time AFC championship game participant wide receiver group and the Bengals, that's like a pretty good thing. You look at the Tennessee Titans, now they have Brown, Julio Jones, and I'm blanking on his name, the former Ram who almost signed with the Chiefs. But they, that again, I don't necessarily know. Like on the top end, Josh Reynolds. On the top end, I think AJ Brown and Julio are better than the Bengals' first two. But when you add that Josh Reynolds in there, I think the Bengals are in the conversation there. You look at Jefferson and Thielen, like Chad Beebe is not going to I think Jefferson and Thielen are both good, but Thielen's aging and Chad Beebe is not an NFL receiver. So I think the Bengals are better there. Godwin and Evans. Now, Godwin, Evans, and Antonio Brown, Tyler Johnson, Jalen Darden from North Texas, and then Scotty Miller. I think that one you have to give it to him. Metcalf and Lockett. Like Lockett's a first half of the year player. Like I do, and I don't really know who's going to be the third receiver. So I think the Bengals are better there. I think you can make a case for Buffalo. I think Diggs, Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders. And then you go all the way down even to the dude from UCF that scored 7 touchdowns last year, Gabriel Davis. I think they're a little bit better. In LA, you have Woods, Cup, and then maybe Deshaun Jackson, maybe Tutu Atwell. I think Woods and Cup are great. I would put them ahead of Boyd and Higgins, but not by that much. So like you start talking about this, and I do think they have a possibility of having a top 5 wide receiver core going into the season. And then when you think about it, adding Riley Reif, a guy who only gave up 1 sack last season as a member of the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, Jonah Williams coming back year 2 of being healthy-ish. More comfortability in the offense with Burrow. Oftentimes, quarterbacks later on in their rookie deal will do a better job of thwarting pressure. This could be a good offense. There's no doubt about it, especially once you add in the idea of having Joe Mixon for 16, 17 games. That's a pretty good offense.
You talked about Riley Reif, and obviously all eyes are on the receivers, but they're also on the Bengals offensive line. And generally you kind of give your rankings on where you kind of project certain position groups to finish. Where do you really see the Bengals offensive line as a whole finishing in 2021?
I think it'll be better. Like I know, we grade the individual guys, and I think Riley Reif's a little bit underrated. I think Jonah Williams, you talk about position groups, year 3, year 4 is really where some of those elite guys end up doing better than they had in year 1, year 2. Now with Williams, we just didn't have him playing year 1 or most of year 2. The interior is going to be a little bit rougher, but like, again, you have year 3 of a play caller and Zach Taylor. You have year 2 of a quarterback in Burrow. I think what we're going to end up seeing, if you're bullish on the Bengals at the end of the season, is, wow, we really had a lot of concerns about that offensive line, but a lot of them didn't come to fruition. And like, that doesn't make these guys great players. It just means that, you know, the decision that the Bengals made to take Jamar Chase at 5 instead of Penei Sewell at 5 is probably warranted. If your guys can get open in 2.5 seconds or less, then you can get rid of the football really quickly, and offensive line play is less of a big deal, right? And you look at one of the real great anecdotes I like. You look at Kansas City a season ago, 14-2, 2 playoff wins against the AFC. 60% of their offensive line was out the majority of this games for them. Hill and Kelsey are 2 of the best guys at separating in 2.5 seconds or less. And it lulled us into this sense of security that, as Chiefs fans, they're fine. They're going to be fine with bad offensive line play because Mahomes can go 1, 2, 3, bam. When he hits his back foot, one of those guys is open, and backup offensive linemen can do great work. In the Super Bowl, the Bucs, drafting 7 defensive backs in the first 2 rounds of the last 3 drafts, were able to cover Hill and Kelsey. Secondary players like Sammy Watkins, McCole Hardman, unable to go open, and that's when the offensive line deficiency started to show up. So if you're a Bengals fan, you say, okay, if I can get 17 games out of Higgins, out of Boyd, and out of Jamar Chase, and Burrow, when he hits that back foot at 2.5 seconds, if one of those guys is open, I think you'll be amazed at how good that offensive line can look.
While I got you on that subject, because one of the arguments that I have for fans or whatever is just where there's a lot to what you just said. One of the main things that I always have is that by us taking Jackson Carman, for example, in the second round, it's probably like the sweet spot for really good teams to take a guard, right? Or like a tackle that you're projecting to play guard or whatever, right? That's the sweet spot. The drop off from Penei to, let's say, a Wyatt Davis or one of the higher tier guards that were in there,
Jackson Carman,
or Jackson. Let's use Jackson Carman. The drop off from that. How does that translate onto a football field? Because one of the main things that I always say to people is that this is in 1991 and guys aren't taking 7-step drops in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So how does that equate? Like, what is the drop off? Is there how many less pressures, how many less sacks, or like what does that look like by having a guy that that we're looking at like Penei Sewell that is marginally thought to be better than maybe a Jackson Carman or something like that? Does that equate in wins? Does that how does that articulate to the football field?
Yeah, that I think that's really, I think you're thinking right up my alley. Whereas, with tackle, think about all the things that have to go right for a tackle to have value, right? He has to not jump off sides. He has to block the player in front of him. And then behind him, the quarterback has to make the right read, throw a ball, receiver has to catch it, make yards after the catch, and so on. Think about the division of credit in that play. Like, the quarterback is the most valuable player on that play. The wide receiver is probably second most valuable, and the tackle is third-ish, right? And if the tackle does the exact same thing and the quarterback airmails the wide receiver, like the differences in plays are immense, right? Now there are going to be plays where the quarterback is going 1, 2, 3, throwing to Jamar Chase for 7 yards, positive EPA play, all that kind of stuff. And the tackle could get his ass kicked on that play, and it doesn't matter one iota. You know what I'm saying? So, like, the hard part with tackle is there are limits to how valuable they can be. The most valuable tackles in the NFL on a year-to-year basis are worth about a half a win. So a half a win. The most valuable wide receivers, the Devontae Adams of the world, are worth about a full win. And so when I think about this as if you're a Bengals fan and you're thinking about how we're in a division with 2 really good football teams in Cleveland and Baltimore, you're not going to get to where you want to be by adding incremental value players like a tackle would be. Because also you have to look at it over replacement player. And you only get one left tackle on the field at a time, or one right tackle, depending upon where they would have played Sewell. But you have to think about, what is Panay over Jonah Williams? What is Panay over Riley Reif? And if I slide Riley Reif into guard, what is, Jackson Carman over Riley? Or, and those are incremental. Whereas if you take, look, the Vikings in 1998 had Jake Reed, was a 4-time 1,000-yard receiver. Chris Carter was the 3rd all-time in receiving touchdowns when Moss was drafted. And Moss blew the top off of everything, right? That's what you get at a wide receiver position, where it's, and AJ Green did the same thing, right? Like in 2011, when he came in, you had quarterback on rookie deal, you had superstar wide receiver on a rookie deal. And what did you see the Bengals do? They got Whitworth at price. They got Burfict. They got Michael Johnson back after he went to Tampa. They got Carlos Dunlap. They add all these. If you take the really valuable positions and you beef them up with rookie contract players, then the stuff that you have that's weaker, you can go out and buy it, and you can buy it for less. If you want to go on you know what DeAndre Hopkins cost? Like, everybody talks about the 2nd round pick and that being cheap. No, he cost $27 million a year. Like, that trade and signing was actually expensive for Arizona. Right. If you want to go out and get Julio, you got to trade a 2nd round pick, and he's 32 years old. Jamar Chase, the 5th overall pick, is such a surplus value. Joe Burrow made half as much money last year as Teddy Bridgewater did. Like, when you have those guys at price, then you can go out, and this is where, like, I've given the Bengals a lot of flack, but I'll give them a ton of credit the last 2 years. They saw the rookie quarterback window, and they went out and they got Trey Waynes. I know that didn't work out quite as well, but he'll play again. They went out and got Mike Hilton, the Chidobe Awuzie, Trey Hendrickson. I know he's replacing somebody, but they got DJ Reader. Like, they were going out and saying, we've been weak at positions, and what we're going to do is take gambles on the most valuable positions in the draft where the blue chip talent is for cheap, and then we're going to pay for the Band-Aids around the rest of the roster. And I think it's a great move because, again, if you get, one win above replacement out of Jamar Chase, I mean, you're in the playoff hunt in the AFC. And and you can't say, like, Joe Thomas played in this league for 10, 12 years, best left tackle in football. Cleveland didn't touch the playoffs because nothing, like, who cares if you complete a pass rep perfectly if your quarterback stinks or your wide receivers can't get open? Like, that's why I think the pick for the Bengals was a good one. And I think a well-reasoned one, and one that, if we come up for air in a couple of years and they're competing again in the AFC, like, we'll look at that and say that was one of the reasons why.
We had a really good debate. I don't know if you've ever caught it. It was called the Civil War. We had your guy Evan McPhillips on there one time, but we took a really, really deep dive into that for a while, and it was really, really crazy. But I love, like, you had some really, really good points right there.
Yeah, definitely, especially the one about Joe Thomas for sure. Now, you said some nice things about the Bengals, but I really want to ask you about the Bengals defense. And you can be honest about it in terms of your projections for the Bengals defense and where you expect them to finish in 2021.
It's going to require, I think, a little bit of – it's certainly going to require some progression from players. Hendrickson, I think, is not as good of a player as Carl Lawson. I think Larry Ogunjobi's a good player. DJ Reader's a good player. At the linebacker position, you need quite a bit of work there. Not necessarily you don't need to acquire players, but you need players to step up. Linebacker, though, is one of the least impactful positions on defense, and so I kind of appreciate their approach the last couple of years of sort of drafting those guys and hoping like some subset of them develops. Where I think where I think things get a little bit interesting is looking at the defensive backfield, because Jesse Bates, full stop, is one of the best defensive backs in all of football. You have him commanding the defense. If you add to that, like what they got Von Bell last season from New Orleans, an okay football player. They got Ricardo Allen from Atlanta, who has played well at times. I think is probably best suited to be a third safety and sort of like a base nickel type of thing, where he's kind of replacing a linebacker. Hoping Von Bell can fill in on the run. And you look at cornerback, and that group has the potential to be a group you can win with, right? Like Eli Apple has had bad seasons. He's just like a lot of other corners. He's streaky, right? Like you lose William Jackson, who has gone, average corner to brilliant corner every other year, and you replace him with a guy who I think is just like a little bit less brilliant in his brilliant years and a little bit less average in his average years. And guys like Apple, guys like Trey Waynes, who I know missed last season, but he's a very solid player. Mike Hilton's one of the, I think, most versatile and best nickel sort of inside guys in football. And then with Darius Phillips and Awuzie, you're hoping one of those guys ends up being good. And that's what secondary play is. Secondary play is very much, I got to find 5 or 6 guys that are reliable, and I don't really care who they are. And I'll give the Bengals credit on this as well. They've thrown numbers at the problem, right? Where you don't want to be. And again, this is where like I look at Kansas City. Maybe this is a leak for Kansas City. I look at Minnesota. I think the same thing. When you say these are my 5 guys and I don't have a ton of depth, you leave yourself open to some bad play, right? If you put 8 or 9 guys that you're kind of comfortable with, and you say, I'm going to let 5 guys emerge here as my defensive backfield, that's a good thing. And I think that helps. And in much the same way as I believe wide receiver play sets the table for offensive line play, I think defensive back play sets the table for pass rushing. I think if you can make the quarterback pat the ball because your secondary can take him off his first read, it'll make your entire pass rush better. We've seen that with the Ravens. We've seen that at times with Pittsburgh as well. And I think the Bengals sort of have that right idea in the sense of sort of building from back to front. And taking a chance on Hendrickson, but mostly building a solid back 7 that I think can make some quarterbacks, think a little bit, as opposed to previous years where they kind of had free access to open players.
In regards to the rest of the league, for someone that's sitting at home and saying, well, Awuzie and Trey Waynes aren't better than da-da-da-da, right? Mm-hmm. 2-part question. Looking at the Chiefs' early Pat Mahomes years, like when they would go, I think that first really good year went out early, right? Their defense to me was not even on paper, probably not what the Bengals are right now, right? In my opinion. But speak to, I guess, like the Kansas City Chiefs, the way that they kind of Pat Mahomes, their situation is what I call it now. Like how they went about constructing their rosters as far as their secondary and their defense, where they went. To me, it seemed like they went offense heavy first, and then let the defense kind of catch up throughout the years. And then the next part is, what do other secondaries look like compared to like what's the cream of the crop secondary? Because there aren't many. Like when you look at Eli Apples of the world or Awuzie's or whatever, to me that's all around the league.
100%. I mean, you look at Kansas City, right? So Kansas City, when they were transitioning, so early on in the Reed era, they were very good. They had Brandon Flowers, they had Sean Smith, they had Marcus Peters, they had really blue chip talent in the secondary. And as they transitioned from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes, part of that transition was, okay, we're going to and this has some Bengals stuff written all over it. We're going to throw $16 million a year at Sammy Watkins to be our number 3 guy. We're going to throw a ton of money at Mitchell Schwartz. We're going to and we're gonna let defense kind of just do what defense does, which is just oscillate year to year, right? Like you look at defense, Minnesota signed Kirk Cousins because they thought they're the best defense in football, and then it falls down to 9, and all of a sudden Kirk Cousins isn't good enough to get you over the hump because defense is just something. I mean, even the Bengals, like 2015, I remember. I mean, like I did a lot of Bengals games in 2015, and that team, with Darquez and Drake Kirkpatrick and George Iloka and Vontaze Burfict, Vincent, like they were good. They were good defense, and like the thing about defense, though, it's mostly about all of your players sort of being above a certain threshold more than it is eliteness, right? Like once Geno Atkins stopped being on a defense where the secondary was, competent, he wasn't as effective because he had to cover. Like Jesse Bates is amazing, but I can guarantee you, if the other 4 guys in the secondary are good enough, he could have 3 or 4 more interceptions this season because he's not covering up for other players' deficiencies. And I think that's one thing that I'll say about Kansas City, that they kind of, I believe there are some issues. Obviously, I think the Frank Clark trade wasn't good and everything, but I think they understand that if you have a great offense, you need to find 11 guys, and specifically 5-6 guys in the secondary who just don't kill you and don't take huge gambles. Don't take, don't take humongous swings of the bat. Find 11 guys for modest prices that won't kill you, and that's tough to find around the league. You look, to me, I think that the standard for secondaries in the NFL, you either have to look at Baltimore with Peters, with Marlon Humphrey. I think it's one of the best players in football. But they lost Earl Thomas last season, and it's a little bit creakier back there. We saw some deficiencies. You look at Denver. I think Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates are kind of in similar classes as far as safeties in the NFL. But you look, they got Ronald Darby. They got Kyle Fuller from the Chicago Bears. Bryce Callahan's one of the best nickels in football, and they used a top 10 pick on Patrick Surtain Jr. So like that to me is a defense where you have 4 corners who can all start, and if one guy gets hurt, you're not going to get killed. And if one guy sucks, like if one guy has a bad season and you have to take him out, you're not kaput. Another secondary, and I know you guys aren't going to like this because they got William Jackson, but I do think Washington's going to be pretty good. They got Kendall Fuller, who went to Kansas City, won a Super Bowl, went back. They got Cameron Curl at safety. They got Landon Collins at safety as well. And I think they're fairly solid as well in the defensive backfield. Like you said, though, every other team, they're just praying. They're like the Bengals. They're just praying that some subset of 5 or 6 guys works out. And that can certainly happen, and we've seen it happen. But it's tough. Tampa Bay is another one. Tampa Bay spent a lot on their secondary and in terms of draft picks, and a lot of them hit. Carlton Davis, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Antoine Winfield's son, all that. It's a concerted effort there, and I think the Bengals, to their credit, have made a concerted effort. And even when Waynes got hurt last year, Alexander got hurt, that you saw like the bad end of variance. If those guys stay healthy, Alexander's gone, but if Wayne stays healthy, then I think you're starting to see the makings of a good defense.
So we talked about Jesse Bates, and you talked about the class of safeties that he's in. Obviously, in the division, there's another young safety that's also all-pro as well, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. If you had to go between the two, which one are you picking and why?
I would take Bates. The only reason I would think about Fitzpatrick, but this hasn't really been used, is that Fitzpatrick has nickel versatility. Like at Alabama, he played in the slot. You saw that a little bit in Miami. You have not seen that in Pittsburgh because of Mike Hilton, who now plays for the Bengals. He was mostly a deep guy. But yeah, Bates hasn't made the mistakes that Minkah's made, right? And I think a lot of safety is obviously making the big plays. You guys are probably old enough. Like if you're a defensive back, like Deltha O'Neal is like a really fun character, but you can't win with Deltha O'Neal very often, right? Like the years he has 10 picks, he gives up 10 touchdowns, and like and he was a corner, and I can tolerate that a little bit more out of corners because it's tough. It's the hardest position in football. But at safety, I can't tolerate big plays being allowed. Like it's just not. And Bates and Simmons are two of those guys that just don't allow big plays. And that's something that it's worth its weight in gold as a safety position. If you can tack onto that, getting interceptions and stuff like that, then that's pretty damn good. And that's where, I put Adrian Amos in that spot. I put Simmons in that spot. I put Bates in that spot.
We can't hear you, Zim.
I'm sorry. Mute button. Hey, one thing that you were talking about too, and I just thought it'd be fun too. I don't know if PFF had the good info on it like they do now. It's just like someone that we consider like probably the creme de la creme of safeties is Ed Reed, right? Did you have anything that I could say to my Ravens friends, like on just comparing like Ed Reed to that? And I know it's really hard to even compare that because the defense that he was on is a lot better than the defense that Jesse Bates is on. But did you have anything that statistically I could say, hey, look, this is how they compare?
Let me look here. Is Ed Reed a junior? I'm trying to find Ed Reed in my old data.
It could be like, I thought Ed Reed would be a really good one. But, because I tell people, like, for someone that doesn't watch the Bengals, right, you're telling them, like, Jesse Bates is one of the best safeties, in football. The average fan just doesn't understand that. And, and I just thought that was, like, a good person to kind of, like, say, this is someone I can compare.
That's a hot mark, though, because Ed Reed.
I just looked at Ed Reed's Edward Reed. Jeez. So I'm trying to this is why you shouldn't code in public. So Ed Reed. So you look at, we only have data back to 2016, and then Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates is a second, I believe. Yeah, Jesse Bates.
Third.
Okay, there we go.
Third.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, so Ed Reed in 2009 got a full win above replacement. I mean, there's actually, I believe, there's a great statistic on Ed Reed. 2010, Ed Reed led the NFL in interceptions despite playing in only 10 games.
Wow.
And he's the only player in NFL history to lead the NFL in one of the major counting statistics despite missing 6 or more games in a season. So,
Crazy.
Ed Reed, you're talking about 7.
Well, sustainability, we haven't even got that with Jesse Bates, so I know.
But Bates, I mean, Bates is in that 1-win category too. That's the thing. The hard part is Reed is such a different player than Bates because Bates is doing. I look at Ed Reed's he had 6 career sacks. He was a free safety, but he was also a blitzer.
Right.
And Bates is more of a really solid free safety. But look, we're really early in his career, right? He started in 2018 and so we're still relatively early on, but as far as value is concerned, he is let's say a 10% within that situation. He's a very good player. Ed Reed to me is the best safety of all time. So I don't know if they're in that category. But you got me thinking about it.
But just putting it in, and I love that metric that you're using where you're just saying that's what I focus a lot too on is impact players and how much does a lot of people put a lot of stock in players or whatever, and a lot of times I'm that guy's pretty good, but he doesn't change your record at the end of the year. Yeah. So I love the fact that when you go into, you say Jesse Bates gets you one more win. Just I always talk about Joe Burrow, if I'm coaching the team, gets the Bengals 6 wins. I don't know what PFF says about it, but 6 wins, Joe Burrow, a full.
And speaking of Joe Burrow, that's one question I have for you because we talk with other fans around the league. I have another show, the AFC North Talk, that I also do, and we talk about Joe Burrow. And a lot of Browns fans are ranking Baker Mayfield currently over Joe Burrow. Where do you project Joe Burrow for next season? Is he in your top 10, top 15, top 20? Where would you project him at?
And where would you put Baker?
I have him in a third, so I have him in a third tier with a bunch of guys who I think could go either way. And I include this, it's tough because you have to, it's not apples to apples to put him in the same conversation as Tannehill and Cousins and Stafford, guys that are making 30 million plus, because I would never choose to pay those guys because it just made it all the stuff we're talking about, all the cool things the Bengals get to do, all the great things the Chiefs got to do when Mahomes is on his rookie deal. You can't do when your quarterback makes so much money. That's the big question in the NFL is if you get a quarterback on a rookie deal, can you get to a Super Bowl before he gets paid? Because after that, it just gets hard, right? We see what happened to Wentz. We see what happened to Goff. And I think Burrow is currently in that class, which when you're making a rookie salary is good enough, right? And I think the same thing's about Baker. Baker got the Browns to the second round of the playoffs last year. I think the same thing about, I think Lamar is an interesting one because it's so hard to value his rushing, but he again is in one of those where it's if Lamar doesn't improve as a passer in 2021, do you pay him $40 million a year? Because that Ravens team has used 67% of their cap on defense, right? Because they know that the best way to use a quarterback who's brilliant at running the ball is to be ahead, right? So then if you pay Lamar $40 million a year, you can't pay your defense 2/3 of the cap. And then so then Lamar's behind, and then he's in a situation we rarely see him in. And while I think he's a great talent, we just don't know. And that's a lot of uncertainty. And I think the same thing. So I think Baker right now has shown me quite a bit. I still don't know if I'd pay him the $40 million because we look at all the things the Browns have done, which is they built him an offensive line. They got him Odell. They got him Jarvis. They got the defense back on track, especially this season. They got one of the best head coaches in football in Kevin Stefanski finally. And that got Baker to a point where he can kind of compete with the Chiefs' backup quarterback in round 2 of the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like that. And that shows how high the bar is, right? Like if you're a Bengals fan, you got to be extremely enthusiastic about Joe Burrow while sobering up about the fact that the bar is extremely freaking high. Josh Allen became like John Elway last year, and like he gets to Kansas City in the AFC title game, and they're still at arm's length away, you know? So
Right.
that's the tricky thing. I think Burrow certainly has the potential, very much so, to be in that like range where if I look at quarterbacks in the NFL, it's Rodgers, Brady, all those guys are going to retire soon. So those are slots that can be filled. You know, Mahomes, Brady, Rodgers, Russ Wilson, Dak Prescott, and Josh Allen. After that, like it's anybody. And it can be Burrow too. And I think when you look at his statistics from 2020, you know, you had accuracy above and beyond what you would expect. You dealt with pressure extremely well. The arm strength issues I don't think are a big deal, especially with wide receivers that can get open quickly. So I think he has the potential there for sure. I don't think the floor is all that low. I think if Burrow disappoints people, he'll still be a good enough quarterback to win with on a rookie contract if the rest of the roster turns around. It's another question as to like how well does he have to play for the Bengals to pony up the 40? Because we've seen it with Dalton. When Dalton was on a rookie deal, that was a steal, and the Bengals were in the playoffs every year. Once that number got high, then you're starting Cedric Aboye at tackle, and you lose Sanu, you lose Marvin Jones, and it's a different ball game. But I think for now, Burrow has the chance to be a top 10 QB, I think.
Cool. One of the things I was going to get into before we let you go is just roster construction. This year coming into the season, like even I'm preparing for my fantasy football leagues and different things like that. I really love like what the Rams have done on defense. Like their defense is like, to me, I love like their defense like on paper, right? But what are some of the rosters that stand out to you? It doesn't have anything to do with the Bengals, but like who do you consider like some of the higher tier constructed rosters that maybe have some more sustainability when you kind of project?
Yeah, and this is so. Here's one I think that'll surprise you guys. I think the Jets have done some great things, and it's a good tale, right? It's a good tale for the rest of the league because I always think about I grew up in Minnesota. I know a lot of Vikings fans. I like to give them a lot of crap on Twitter, but like in 2018, the Jets made a run at Kirk Cousins and they failed, and since then, they've drafted 2 quarterbacks in the first round. They've had 2 head coaches, 2 GMs. They've failed in every way possible. And the Jets currently are in a better position than Minnesota is. You know, they have a good head coach. They have good cap situation. They have a quarterback who is extremely talented on a rookie deal. And that shows, and that's good if you're a Bengals fan and they've been down for a couple years. That's great if you're a Denver Broncos fan and they've been down for a few years. If you just continue to take chances at the QB position through the draft, that is the way to win in the NFL until you find one of those top 5 or 6 guys I'm talking about. And so to me, from a roster construction standpoint, you look at the teams. The Chargers are in a great position. The Jets are in a great position. I don't necessarily think the Rams are in a great position, but I do think they have a great coach, which should help. The Niners are kind of in a good position, although they had to mortgage quite a bit, much like the Jets did for Darnold for Trey Lance, but I think Trey Lance is a decent talent. I think the Jaguars are in a good position. Now, their coach is kind of a kook, but like that could get them in trouble. But, they have good, talented players. They've drafted a lot in the first round. When you trade Jalen Ramsey and you trade players like that, you get first-round picks, and they end up, eventually they'll do something for you. So teams like that, like any team with a quarterback on a rookie deal that hasn't also like mortgaged their draft picks, I think is in a great position. So the Jets, to me, are one that's I think sneaky and one that we can all learn from.
No, that's dope. That's dope. Well, before we get out of here, we have to ask you this: how many wins do you project for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2021?
I have the Bengals at 7.5 or 8 wins.
Facts. I like
I actually think my simulation has the Bengals with more wins than the Steelers.
it. Ooh, I love that. Definitely love that. I noticed earlier.
I can't get you in the Browns and Ravens territory yet.
Yeah.
But
good.
I do think the combination of a good quarterback and a better schedule and stuff like that. Like I think the Bengals will be a team that will be fun to watch this year.
Right. That's my one thing that I've always said. Me and Ace had a conversation before we came on. I said Zach is gone if he's 7 or less. I'm hoping, right? If it's 7 or less, then he's gone. Then you're looking at Joe Brady, right? He's just sitting right there for us, right?
Yep.
But anything above that, it's like all. This is our fun season, like the Browns last season, and in 2022, like we're going all in, pedal to the floor inside that window that you were talking about earlier. Before you go, I want to let you know about Midwest Barbecue. My boy Ace has got the shirt on right now. You're in Cincy. I want to give you this $5 off coupon. Matter of fact, I have 3 $5 coupons I'm going to give you. But if you're in the area, please go check out my guys at Midwest Barbecue. Really, really good food. Ace, did you have anything that you wanted to share with Eric before he rolls out? Eric, tell everybody where they can follow you at in case they didn't catch it at the beginning of the show.
Yep, PFF_Eric. And obviously, if you are a fan of PFF, know that we're just down in the OTR. So really, really fun to be a part of Cincinnati.
Facts. Well, Eric, we thank you for your time. And as usual, Zam, we'll have to end this with a yes.
Sirski.
Hello, world. What separated your deep ball from everybody else?
My deep ball, it has a little secret sauce to it, man.
Never get too high, never get too low, but just keep moving.
The whole story is Carlos never beat me in any kind of sports, and